Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar today. For those of you who have not attended one of my webinars, I am Damon with Spider Forensics, and this is the March instance of the Talking Tech with Vound webinar. Today, we're going to go through the email threading feature in Intella, and we'll discuss how email threading really works and what Intella's doing in the background to essentially rethread your emails to make it more efficient for review and things like that. We have muted everyone's microphone. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat area and I will try and answer them all once we finish the presentation portion of the webinar. So as I mentioned, I am Damon. I am the Director of Professional Services at Spider Forensics. We are a training and services partner with Vound. I've been doing e-discovery and forensics for close to a decade now in various roles. So we'll start out, what is email threading? So for those of you who are not aware of what email threading really is, email threading, in Intella, it's a two-part process for rebuilding your email conversations. That's the first part. And then the second part is identifying inclusive and non-inclusive emails. And we'll discuss shortly what that really means. So for step one of the process, Intella's going to go through and perform analysis on all the email headers within the case, providing you run email threading on all emails. But what it's doing is trying to identify emails that are part of the individual conversations that are going on. In step two, Intella will analyze the email bodies and attachments to identify inclusive versus non-inclusive emails. And ultimately, what you're going to end up with is a really good graphic like on this slide here, where Intella has put the email conversation back together, and you can see how it branches off as people are, added into a conversation or removed. So the benefits of running email threading, and for all my cases that I use Intella for, I always perform email threading. So my first benefit would be you can review the entire email conversation at once rather than reviewing the individual emails. Without running email threading, yes, you could do a linear review of all the emails in the case, but this is going to take time and you're going to have to manually figure out, okay, what emails are part of this conversation. So by running email threadings, we can review a whole email conversation at one time. And this is especially useful because when you're determining responsiveness or non-responsiveness of emails, if you have a look at the whole email conversation, you can automatically, mark 10, 15 emails as responsive or non-responsive in one go. The second major benefit is the identifying inclusive versus non-inclusive emails. So inclusive emails, these are emails which include all the emails from the previous emails within the thread within the body. So if I look at the last email in the thread and it's marked as inclusive, then you can be sure that all the emails that came before it in the conversation will be quoted within the body of that email. Now, non-inclusive, it's an indication that the content of that email is included in another email later on in the thread. And with non-inclusive emails, you don't need to review these. So by running email threading, you automatically cut down the number of emails that you potentially have to review. And then my number three reason is identifying missing emails within a thread. So as Intella is going through and analyzing all these email headers, it can identify emails that are missing within a conversation. So, and we'll go through this in the email header. You'll have references to the email that came before it in the thread. And if Intella finds a reference to an email that doesn't exist in your data set, then it's going to mark on the email thread graphic that there is a missing email. And for me, that's always a red flag to say, okay, well, I may not have all the data. So I can go back to my customer and request that they provide the additional data that I'm needing. To perform email threading, there are numerous ways to do that in Intella. First, you can run it as a task. You can run it from the right-click menu in the Details pane, and you can also execute it from the Workflow section of the Insight tab. One prerequisite for running email threading is you have to have the Analyze Paragraphs option enabled during indexing. And this is how Intella is able to identify your non-inclusive and inclusive emails. So if you want to run email threading, just make sure you check off that Analyze Paragraphs option when you're adding your data sources. So now let's get into the meat of what this webinar is about. How does it work? So stage one, Intella is going to analyze all the email headers to identify all emails that belong to a thread. So within a header, so for those of you who've never seen an email header before, the email headers contain all the information that is essentially needed to get an email from one email account to another. There are other things in there like the path it took to get to that location, which is how Intella is able to plot geolocation information based off IP addresses within the header. But for email threading, you're focusing on 3 different header fields. So the first is the message ID. So the message ID is a value that will be unique for each email. So if an email has the same message ID, then it's most likely a duplicate. The second field is references. So the references field, it contains the message IDs for all emails that came before it in the thread. So if you was to look at the last email in a thread and you look at this references field, you would actually see a listing of all the message IDs that are part of that conversation. And the in reply to field is the last field Intella will look at, and this will contain the message ID for the email that came before it in the thread. So the email that this current email was a reply to. And this is how Intella is able to figure out the order in which emails are within the thread. So let's look at an example. So here is a very simple email thread. It's got 5 emails. If you look at the graphic here on the headers tab, we got the basic information about the email, who it's from, who it's to. So we have an email from Joe Carpenter to Doug Hall. The subject was, I was testing this app. You do see thread topic, thread index. These are Microsoft Outlook specific fields. And for those of you that are interested, these fields are what Microsoft Outlook used to rebuild the conversation so you can see a conversation view within Outlook. But if you see at the bottom, we have the message ID. So this is the unique ID for that email. So if we move to the next email in the thread, this is a reply from Doug Hall to Joe Carpenter. We have a new message ID, so it's different than the first one, but we also have the references field and the in reply to field. So the references field and in reply to field contain the message ID for the previous email in the thread. So this is how Intella knows that our first email is in the same thread as this current email. So we'll skip ahead to the very last email in this thread. We have a response from Joe Carpenter to Doug Hall, and also has to Joe Carpenter as well. And if you notice in the references field, we have a long list of message IDs. So these are the message IDs for all the other 4 emails that came before it in the thread. So using that message ID field, the references and in reply to, Intella was able to rebuild this 5 email conversation. And then with the in reply to field, it was able to put it into order. So here's a more complex email thread. It branches off in several different into several different conversations. They are between the same people, but you'll notice in this graphic that the very first email in the threads has a envelope with a question mark. This indicates it's a missing email. So Entella looked at the headers for the first 3 emails in the second line here, and determined that the in reply to field, the message ID included in there, was not in my data set. So if I actually look at one of those headers, I can see that we have an in reply to message ID and a references message ID that Entella was unable to find in the data set. So now in this instance, I would go back to my customer and say, okay, well, I'm missing an email, any possibility that you can provide that to me. Now, if Entella was able to identify, like in this example, the inclusive email, which is my very last emails in the thread, then I may have the text portion of it, but it's always nice to have the email itself, that it could provide additional metadata for us. So in stage 2, as I mentioned before, Entella will analyze the bodies of the emails to determine all the inclusive emails in the thread. So the inclusive emails are emails that contain the bodies of all other emails in the thread, or all emails that potentially came before it in the thread. So if we look at the content of the emails in the thread that we've been going through, the first email, Doug, let me know if you can see something in this file, Joe Carpenter. So that's our very first email. If we look at the second email, what do I do with it now? You'll notice underneath it, coded underneath, is the body of the first email. So as Entella is going through and performing paragraph analysis, it's identified that the content of the second email is in the first email, so we don't need to review the first email. We just need to review the second email. But if we skip all the way ahead to the final email in the thread, so we have here the second email. What do I do with it now? We also have the third email in the thread. You should be able to extract something from it with that application. We have the fourth email, and at the very top, we have the content of the current email. So during this analysis, Entella has essentially reduced our workload by 80%. We only have to review that last email in the thread. So it can significantly improve the efficiency of your review, because you don't have to review every email. And when you're looking at a corporate environment where a lot of your data set, or a big portion of your data set, is email data, you could end up only having to review maybe 30% of the emails in the case, which will significantly save time and cost, which, as I'm sure you guys are aware, the cost for review is probably the most expensive part of an e-discovery type investigation. So what I'm going to do here, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to actually jump into Entella, and we'll look at another email thread, and we'll just kind of go through this again. And if you guys have any questions, I'll go ahead and try my best to answer all those. So let me bring up Entella here. So I have another email thread. This one actually has 9 emails. Now, a useful thing for you is, if you sort on the primary date, if you select an email thread and sort on the primary date, it will put them all back into order based off the date. And this helps if you could kind of next through each email within the thread. So I'm going to open this up. I'm already on the email thread tab. So this one has 5 emails again, but it does have duplicates. So if there's multiple email icons, it means that there are duplicates of this email. Now, if you're unsure of what the different graphics mean for the emails represented here, in the very top right in Entella, you have a legend which will tell you. So blue envelopes are inclusive, the white ones are non-inclusive. As you saw in the presentation, one with a question mark means that there's a missing email. The 2 email icons means their duplicate emails, which we see here. And then the standard reply all, forward, and attachment. So let's take a look at the first email in the thread. I'm going to go over to the headers tab. So here's what email header looks like. A lot of confusing stuff, but at the top half we have basically the transport information, the route the email took to get from one email mailbox to another. So this is how Intello will plot the location or the sender's location on the geolocation map. But what we're interested in is the information that comes below that. So here we have the standard email metadata. So this email is from Joe Carpenter to Doug Cole. And then we have our message ID, which is unique. So I'm gonna next to the next email in the thread. And this one has, again, it has a unique message ID, and then it references our first email. So we have our references and in reply to. So Intello knows that the email with this message ID belongs to the same thread, and this email came after by using the email reply to message ID. So if we scoot ahead, I'm actually going to go to my email thread tab, and you can actually double click and it will open up a new preview window for whichever email you selected on. So if we go here, and then we have again a new message ID, unique message ID, and then we have the references field has all the message IDs for all emails that came before it within the thread. It may not necessarily indicate all the emails, because if we don't have the emails that come after this, then Intello has no real way to identify that it's missing. But here's all the emails that came before it within that thread, and we know the order based off the in reply to information. Now, there are certain instances where an email may not have a header. So they're using an example of the Windows 10 mail application. The structure of those emails are very complex, and sometimes you may not get the header information displayed here. But it's also available on the raw data tab. It may actually be a little bit more friendlier looking. So if we look through here, we'll find our message ID. So here we have the same information in here. So even if you don't have your header tab populated, you could come to your raw data and find that information there. But Intello has already done all the hard work for you, and so you can just go ahead and essentially review anything that has a blue icon. So if I close out of these preview windows, to identify all inclusive, non-inclusive emails or missing emails, if we go to our features facet, and then go to our threaded facet here, threaded category, we'll see all the inclusive emails. So in my data set, 9,863 emails were threaded. I only had 230 non-inclusive emails. So that's 230 emails that I don't have to review. And I have 24 email threads that are missing, or email that are missing from a thread. So I can look at those, and here are all the email threads that don't have an email within it. So here it's just, we got one email, and the first email in the conversation is missing. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and answer some questions. So is there a way to change the date, primary date, to day, month, year in IntelliConnect? So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and provide the answer for that. We'll send you an email for that one. I'll just have to go in and figure out how to do that, or if it's possible. The next question, is any specific header field used in thread from messages come from Lotus Notes? So typically, regardless of where or what email client is being used to send the email, they should all have a message ID, or if it's a response, you'll have the references and a reply to field. So it's always going to use those type of three. Next one, the custom fields X field and header are analyzed in threading. I don't believe so, no. So as far as I'm aware, all that's happening is analyzing the message ID, the in reply to, and the references email. Now there is an option to, when you actually run email threading, I'll show you real quick. So if I just run email threading on this email, so you have this analyze headers embedded in emails. So if Intella does have the ability to actually scan through the content of an email, and if there's header information that's within the quoted text, it can look at those and try and rebuild the header, rebuild the threads that way. But majority of it is using those three fields in the email header. Great questions, thank you. Do we have any more questions from anybody? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar. We really appreciate it. So in case you're not aware, all these webinars that we're doing throughout this Talk and Text series, they will be going up on, they go up on YouTube. So if you missed some of the previous webinars, you can go up there and watch those. They're very helpful as you go through and use Intella to perform your investigations. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.